The knock came just after sunset. Too sharp, too forceful for a neighborly visit. Danielle paused, groceries still on the counter, her badge case resting by the door. Through the glass, she saw them. Two men in uniforms, badges glinting under the porch light. Their voices carried authority, but something felt off. The uniforms didn't match, the patches were wrong. She'd seen enough real law enforcement to know the difference. Still, they stood tall, demanding she open up. For a black woman living alone in a suburban HOA community, this was more than unsettling. It was dangerous. Because when someone pretends to hold power, the damage can be just as real. What Danielle didn't know yet was that the next few seconds would expose the truth and test how far intimidation would go. And when she reached for the one thing they never expected, everything changed. Danielle Brooks had worked hard for her peace. At 34, after years of federal service as a U.S. Marshal, she finally bought her own home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The lawns were manicured, the streets silent after dark, the kind of place people bragged about in glossy brochures. But behind those trimmed hedges and HOA newsletters, Danielle had begun to sense something colder. From the day she moved in, the Homeowners Association had kept her under a microscope. Notes on her door about the color of her curtains. Emails about her guests parking too long. Whispers at community meetings that never seemed directed at anyone else. For most neighbors, it was just rules. For Danielle, it felt personal. Still, she tried to ignore it. Her work taught her discipline. Calm under pressure, sharp observation, always assessing. At home, she tried to let that armor drop. She would cook, water the plants on her porch, and remind herself this house was her sanctuary. But harassment has a way of growing. Cars idling near her driveway late at night. An anonymous letter slipped under her door. All meant to unsettle, all meant to remind her that she was being watched. That's why the knock that evening didn't feel random. It felt like the next step. The men on her porch weren't strangers. They were part of something bigger, something her badge had prepared her for, even if her heart wasn't ready. And when she looked closer at those badges, she realized the danger wasn't just at her door. It was already inside her neighborhood. Danielle stood frozen by the door, her eyes fixed on the badges glinting beneath the porch light. At first glance, they carried the weight of authority. Metal, patches, the stance of men who expected obedience. But her years as a marshal told her what most people would miss. The stitching was off, the lettering uneven, the shine too cheap. These weren't officers. They were actors. The taller one leaned closer to the glass. "Ma'am, we've had complaints. We need to come inside." His tone carried the force of command, but his eyes gave him away, darting, uncertain, like someone waiting for a signal. Danielle didn't move. Inside, her groceries still sat on the counter, milk sweating under the kitchen light. The ordinary clashed with the extraordinary, two worlds colliding at her doorstep. She thought back to the warnings, the HOA letters, the car idling at night, the sense of being watched. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. Her pulse quickened, but her training steadied her breathing. Every second she delayed, their confidence faltered. The shorter one shifted, glancing over his shoulder as if nervous about being seen. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A porch light flicked on across the street, then quickly off again. Neighbors were watching. Neighbors were hiding. Danielle took a single step closer to the door, her hand brushing the small table where her badge case rested. She didn't reach for it yet. Timing was everything. "Ma'am, open the door now," the tall one demanded, louder this time. His hand hovered near his belt, but instead of a holster, Danielle saw the corner of a folded paper, cheap, laminated, the kind sold in novelty shops. The truth was undeniable. They weren't here to serve. They were here to scare. What would you do in Danielle's place? Open the door, call for help, or stand your ground? Her mind raced through options. Dial 911, confront them directly, wait them out. But she also knew intimidation feeds on hesitation. She exhaled slowly, reached down, and pressed her palm against the cool leather of her badge case. Not yet, she told herself. Just a few more seconds. Let them lean in. Let them believe they had her cornered. Because when she finally revealed who she really was, their game would end. And as the taller man took one final step toward the door, Danielle decided it was time. The taller man raised his voice, fist thudding against the doorframe. "Open it now!" His partner shifted nervously, tugging at the sleeve of his too-new uniform. Their confidence was slipping, but the aggression was rising. Danielle's hand tightened on the badge case. For years, she had stood face to face with fugitives, traffickers, men who thought fear was power. Tonight, the game was no different. Only the stage had changed. She unlocked the door, just enough to let it creak open. The men leaned forward, expecting surrender. Instead, she stepped into the porch light, her shoulders squared, eyes steady. In one motion, she lifted the black leather case and flipped it open. The silver gleam of her U.S. Marshal badge caught the light like fire. The taller man's words died in his throat. His partner's eyes went wide, mouth parting as the reality sank in. They hadn't cornered a frightened homeowner. They had walked straight into a federal officer's line of sight. Danielle's voice cut sharp, commanding, steady as steel. "You want to explain why fake cops are knocking on my door?" Silence. Then panic. The shorter man stumbled back first, muttering something to his partner. The taller one cursed under his breath, his false authority crumbling into fear. Within seconds, both turned, rushing down the steps, uniforms flapping, shadows swallowed by the night. Tires screeched as their car peeled away, leaving nothing but silence and the echo of their retreat. Danielle stood there, badge still raised, heart pounding but steady. They had come to intimidate her, but in the end they ran. If you believe no one should face this kind of intimidation in their own home, hit like and share this story, because silence only protects the guilty. But while they fled into the darkness, Danielle knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of exposing who had sent them. The night grew quiet again, but Danielle knew silence didn't mean safety. She closed the door, locking it twice, and set her badge gently on the table. Her groceries still waited on the counter, the milk now warm, the bread slightly crushed, a reminder of how quickly ordinary moments could be shattered. The next morning, she filed a full report with local authorities and her agency. The so-called officers had vanished, but evidence remained. The fake patches, the car description, and most importantly, the knowledge of who had likely sent them. The Homeowners Association had always hidden its hostility behind rules and paperwork. Now their intimidation had crossed into criminal territory. Neighbors whispered about what happened, some pretending they hadn't seen anything at all. But one truth rang louder than the silence. Danielle's strength had turned fear into exposure. She had not just defended her own home, she had pulled back the mask on a system of harassment that thrived in shadows. Her daughter called that evening worried. Danielle simply said, "I handled it." But deep down she knew many others never get the chance. For every woman who flashes a badge, countless more are left unheard, unprotected, and unseen. If stories like Danielle's matter to you, if you believe voices like hers must be amplified, subscribe now. Because telling these stories isn't just history, it's survival. And then one question hung in the air. How many more people will have to prove who they are before they're finally treated like they belong?